is Raina Campbell, your Chief Dream Driver, and welcome to the No Parking Podcast, where through conversations and discussions with creators like yourself, we'll find interesting approaches to help you take your dreams out of park, put them in drive, and ride towards success. Hey Dream Drivers, welcome to episode 75 of the Dreams and Drive podcast. And today we're going to be speaking with Barry of Podcast in Color. And I am so excited to have Barry on. Podcast in Color is actually an online directory for podcasters of color. So if you are a podcaster who identifies as a person of color and you want to submit your podcast to the directory, you can do so at podcastincolor.com. And over the past few years and some change, Barry has really been instrumental in leading the conversation online about, what podcasters of color are doing and why our shows are so important, and just getting publicity, getting the word out about a lot of shows that we would not know about if it was not for a platform. So thank you so much for Barry and all that you have done. And on this episode, we're going to chat with Barry about her own journey of building the community, what she has learned about what makes podcasts successful, and just some other tips that she has for other creators out there. So I really hope that you guys will enjoy that. We talk about things such as some of the challenges she faced when launching the website, some of the things she's learned about the gaps in podcasting and why she believes podcasts by people of color are so special. We talk about the power of the niche and diverse voices. We also talk about the power of engagement and what launching Podcast in Color taught Barry about herself. Barry and I even geek out about some of our favorite podcasts, including My Leaks, My Taught You, The Casey Crew, and others that you'll hear about in the episode later on. I hope that you guys really enjoy hearing from Barry. It was just a pleasure to be able to talk to her. I know I say this over and over, but each week when I talk to a guest, I think someone even mentioned this in the listener survey, which if you want to take, just go to dreamsanddrive.com/survey. Someone mentioned that it feels as if when I'm talking to people, I'm just not talking to interview them for you all, but I'm also talking to them because I'm genuinely interested in what they have to say. And yes, that is true. I genuinely love talking to each and every guest, and there's something I get out of doing this personally. And as a lot of you know, this podcast has been my own dream. And every time I talk to a guest, I'm just so honored that they are part of it and that they are allowing me to do something that I've wanted to do for a long time. So as you're listening to this episode, tell us that you're doing it. Make sure you're following us on social at Dreams and Drive and also at Podcast in Color. I encourage you to use the hashtag Pods in Color or Dreams and Drive while listening so we can get in and engage with you. Make sure to check out our show notes at dreamsanddrive.com and just click on episode 75. This episode is going to be thebomb.com. I know you're going to enjoy, and I can't wait to hear what you guys think. Hi, Barry. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Dreams and Drive.
Hello.
I'm excited to have you on. As we were chatting before, I just, my whole podcasting journey, I want to say I submitted Dreams and Drive to Podcast in Color. I want to say, when did you launch the platform?
It was in 2015.
Okay.
It's March. I'm coming up on second year. Something, I don't know, something I should be celebrating.
I just remember launching it or submitting it to the directory and just kind of going down all right, so what is this Podcast in Color platform? Oh my God, there's so many other podcasts of color, and just discovering so much. And I know a lot of podcasters of color appreciate all that you have done for the community and for the podcasting landscape. So I just want to say thank you before we get started.
Oh, no problem. Glad to be of service.
So it's funny because you listen to Dreams and Drive, so you kind of know how these are. So our first question that I love to ask all our guests is, what inspired you as a child? So if I had to say, Barry, what were you like as an 8-year-old, 7-year-old? What would you say?
I would say I was abrasive. I wouldn't say books inspired me. I'm very much a reader. I've always read books or been interested. I've read every Nancy Drew book for interesting things. Once I get into something, I need to know everything about it. So I would say I'm very inquisitive. I tell people there's a story that my mom tells people that when I was in elementary school, she was always coming up to the school because I went to a majority white school. Mm-hmm. And she'd be like, she understands what racism is, and that's why she's getting in trouble, because she says you call on all the other little white kids and not the black kids. So you can say I've always been like known what's going on, and I'm always like, no, I need a voice, and I'm here.
Did your parents teach you that? Or did your mother teach you that growing up?
No, I don't remember any conversations like that. Like, even when she tells that story or something like that, she never says because we had talks at home or anything like that. It just was maybe like the environment I grew up in. They were both in sororities and fraternities, so
you were a woke berry at 8 years old. So back,
I was just gonna say she's always been around.
So back then, like, what was the dream? What was your dream as a young berry?
I used to think that I was gonna be a book editor, but I just never really followed through. That's what I used to think I was going to do. I thought I would do something like that because of how much I read and liked books and just how I'm interested in things and writing. But that's not necessarily the way I went. Like, I went to school for that, and I was bored. So
you went to school for book editing?
I went to school. Journalism and English is what I was at when I was at Hampton University, but I didn't finish because I was there, but I was just there. Mostly, so.
You didn't like the HBCU experience?
No, I mean, I loved Hampton. It was more I wasn't connecting to what I was studying. I kind of wish that I knew more before I went to college, or like know more about different jobs outside of it. I just think I just attached myself to something and kept going with it when I probably should have changed it up over time.
So you kind of just got bored a little bit and just wanted to just leave and do something else?
I didn't feel like I was going to do anything with it. And of course, Hampton was expensive. And so I stopped, and I ended up starting working with family. My family has a lot of entrepreneurs doing different things. So I was working with them on different things and kind of did that for a while.
So how did Podcast in Color come about?
Podcast in Color came about because I spend a lot of time on Twitter. And so following Kid Fury and Crystal, I saw the first time they tweeted the Read podcast. And I listened, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm a podcast listener. I remember a few episodes in, I sent it to my cousins, and it was like, okay, we're all podcast listeners. And then people started asking about different podcasts. And because I'm on Twitter, I might see something. I'm like, oh, that's out there or that's out there. But if it's not just put in front of you, people are like, it doesn't exist. So over time, it just felt like, what if I could just put all these one place? So maybe somebody isn't searching for the read, and I don't need everybody to love the read, but maybe they can find something they'll love. So,
all right. So what? So when did you have the idea? Because you launched Podcast in Color in 2015, but did you also have the idea then, or did it take you a while to actually launch the site and the platform and everything?
Well, my first idea, it was 2014. My first idea was actually to do a podcast app, and my thing was I saw that there needed to be a community. I tell people I was always online on Thursday morning refreshing SoundCloud.com/the read. And so it was through that I saw that in that first 10 minutes, I would press play when it came up. But if I refreshed again, just to see what was going on, it was at least 1,000 or 2,000 people in that first 10 minutes that I could tell were doing the same exact thing I was doing. And so it was like, if other people are out there talking about podcasts and I'm on my Twitter timeline, but I can't find these people, how can we find each other? Because there has to be other people like me. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's cool.
I was going to do an app. And so I reached out to people to try to get the app together, but that really fell apart. And then I ended up losing my job, and I was still tweeting about podcasts. And I was like, well, what if I just started with a Twitter account and a website and went from there?
When you said you were going to do an app, were you going to design an app and program it and code it all yourself? Or was it just you were going to figure out how to do it?
Not myself. Okay. I was thinking of a design, and I reached out to coders and people that had created apps to kind of think of what they thought, or did they think it was something viable. But the people I was reaching out to they were busy at the time, and it just wasn't the right time. So I felt like I still needed to do something. And then after I lost my job, I was like, well, let me just try. So,
where were you working when you lost your job?
I actually figured this out yesterday because I was talking to someone. I was at Best Buy in their appliance where you would call to get it fixed, like appliances or TVs. Mm-hmm. And one day they decided to get rid of those departments and take them somewhere else. And so I came back from actually New York. It was their third anniversary show or one of their anniversary shows. I came back, and the day I came back to work, it was the day they laid everybody off. It was pretty crazy.
So were you like, F this, I'm about to start podcast in color, bitches? I'm just playing.
No, it was more like me being at home in bed already, like listening to podcasts. I, tweeting the read hashtag, searching the read hashtag to talk to other people that were talking about it. And I was like, well, Crystal follows me on my personal account. And so somewhat I was just like, it feels like I'm standing for somebody and they're like watching me do it the whole time. So what if I could do this somewhere else? So it didn't feel weird or something. And so, and then I started Podcast in Color, and I didn't really, one thing I would say about me that I didn't really want to be over 1,000 followers on my personal account. So I make sure that never happens, and I've actually locked my account now. And so for me to start Podcast in Color, it was really hard because I don't aim to be in the spotlight a lot. And so like a lot of people reading my thoughts, they're going back to it months later. I'm like, is that really needed? So this is a trying thing for me to do Podcast in Color.
It's interesting that you say that, because although Podcast in Color is a platform and I know that it's a directory, when I think of when I think of it on social, I still think of you. You know what I mean? Like, let's say you grow the platform more and you have someone else who does the social. I feel like people will miss the you that is the Twitter presence of Podcast in Color. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's what I think about a lot. So.
But I guess it's different. Like, you can be the Barry podcaster, then on your personal account, you can just be you, Exactly. And that's what I try to be. I don't aim to be like a professional everything or a teacher of everything. I just want to be regular. So let's go back to the early days of launching the Podcast in Color website. When you had the idea, you were putting everything together. What were some of those big challenges that you worked through during that time?
Trying to find the right type of website. Like, I've ended up on Squarespace, but I had started on Blogger. Like a while ago, I'd had Tumblrs and did a WordPress personal blog for a while and things like that. So it was really trying to find the right website that would be able to handle the updates that I was doing and look like how I wanted it to look, and just try to give me, different options. And so I would say I started on Blogger, and I was there for a while, and it just didn't work out. And then I switched over to Squarespace, and the switch over, oh my gosh. But I'm there now for right now. But I am thinking of something else. I don't know. There's just always more to do. I feel like one of the biggest thing was the website, and then in finding podcasts. I tell people all the time, like, the first time somebody else said they were going to do a directory, I think I felt like really personal about it, because I'm like, to start this directory, I was Googling all the search terms. I was on Facebook searching all types of weird stuff. I'm on Twitter, like, doing half words and things like that. Like, it was not that all these podcasts came to me. Like, to start this, I have to search the links and all of those things out, and then build from there. So
you feel like if somebody else comes along, they're kind of using your work and your, like, the legacy you already built and capitalizing off of it?
I would say that's how I felt a year ago. And now I'm just like, this is a resource. I understand other people are going to do other resource type things like this, and it's not my only thing. Like, I would say the first time I thought like that, it felt like Podcast in Color and the directory was like all I had. So, but now it's just like, no, but I have me. And the reason I have Podcast in Color is because I thought of the idea, and everything I'm doing is something I thought about and decided to do. So if somebody's going to do something I was doing a couple of years ago, I mean, that's not necessarily what I would do, but I mean, that's open to anyone. I feel like the directory I have now, if I hadn't started a directory and I did something else, a podcast, I would not have done a directory. Like, the complicatedness and like getting people the links, the updating and things like that, and then having a website, and then wanting a social media presence, and then still having other jobs and stuff like that is not an easy thing to keep up with.
I know. I was thinking, like, you have a lot of podcasts on there, and it's not like, because it's a website, you know how, like, you can easily, like, there could be some algorithm if you had the app and people could just search stuff and it probably automates by itself. Like, you're actually manually going in on the back end and changing everything and updating everything, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a tough part. So I actually wanted to ask you, like, how do you handle competition? And I won't name any names because people definitely are probably listening. But I do feel like, within the past few months, there have been other people who maybe they've been inspired by you to launch their own niche directories within the whole podcast and color spectrum, if you think about it. Do you think that detracts from what you're trying to do, or do you think it adds to it?
I don't think it really does either, because I feel like this is kind of bad, but sometimes I feel like when people are approaching me about different opportunities, if other people that were, doing similar things to me were putting themselves out there more, maybe people didn't feel like I have to be the only person to come to ask for things. And so I would say right now, I mean, a directory is great, but a lot of these websites and different networks want somebody to consult with or talk with, or, where's a podcast about this? Like yesterday I was tweeting about the Drinking Partners podcast because iTunes podcast had a beer list. And I'm like, Drinking Partners should be a part of that. So it's just like, it's the things that people ask me for and do. I'm like, I'm doing a lot, so I can't say yes to everything. So I wish in some different ways that people offer themselves up in a different way to say, you know what, I actually know podcasts, so you can come to me and I can tell you about podcasts, or I can write about it on your site, and things that I kind of feel like I'm either too busy to do, or it doesn't seem like my lane right now, but I might have to do it because I want somebody to be doing that.
So I was talking to Wise of Indie Creative Network, the founder of Indie Creative Network, and he was talking about how he really thinks podcasts are the soul of society, and how they are, like, this medium is going to stay around for a while, right? Like, do you agree with that? And why do you think podcasts are so special from your perspective?
I do agree with Wise, and I feel like podcasts are so special right now because it provides a way to connect in a way that we didn't have before. Like, you have Twitter, but the conversation can go anyway as much as more people get involved. But with a podcast, you have the 2 people or 4 people you're listening to, and the opinion gets out, and then you go from there with your thought process. Like, if you're getting a podcast out of New Orleans, if something happens in New Orleans, we can listen to those people. We don't have to listen to the media per se, or, what other people are saying, or, start saying, why are you guys writing this? And that's not the story. It's like, no, I can go to 2 people that were standing out on the corner and they're podcasting and telling me exactly how it is. And that's who I can go to see what's going on. I don't need the other stuff anymore. So I like it that it's bringing a personal thing to Black people and people of color that we really didn't have before. And not even just in the United States, across the world, really.
Yeah, because I know, like, the UK, they're having their own podcast explosion where a lot of creators over there are now finding their voice and creating platforms. But one of the things I wanted to ask you then is, do you think that we are approaching a podcast overload? And do you think that everybody's trying to do a podcast but not really trying to do a podcast? Right. Do you get what I mean?
Yes, in a way, but I don't think that we're reaching an overload, because I don't think at this point I think that people get into things, like a lot of people got into blogs, and then you said, oh, you know what, I was blogging personally, but I could actually blog about this subject and I'm really good at it, and people pay attention to it. So I think we're finding that people got into podcasting, they know there's a voice out there, and they're saying, what else could I podcast about or talk about, to bring people in that's not necessarily maybe pop culture. Like, I do feel like there's an overload of pop culture, but there's still other podcasts. Like, we still have entrepreneur podcasts, and even if I'm listening to 10 different ones, they're not interviewing the same people, and it's all different people, and how they, came up is differently. So I think we're reaching a place where we're reaching enough podcasts so that we can talk to anybody about podcasts. It's not just somebody that gets TV or somebody that reads books, but it could be, somebody that knits, or somebody that has a fashion truck, or, things like that. So I think we're getting to the point where anybody will be able to see a podcast, not just people that are in entertainment or things like that will like podcasts.
And I also think it's just important for, like, creators of color to be part of the bigger podcasting landscape, because we're not the dominant players, you know what I mean? And not because we don't have the interesting content, we're not creating good shows. I just think that podcasting the popular ones, mainstream America, if you think about it, right? If you go on iTunes, if they never had that Black Experience channel, they never had like their whole Black Voices in Business or whatever it was, how would any of these other really good creatives of colors get noticed? You know what I mean? So it's important that we keep creating and putting our perspectives out there.
And that is true. And, you know, just bringing that up, I met with someone from iTunes before that happened and like kind of talked to them about when that was happening. And so that's part of the pressure I feel somewhat to do things no matter what, because how does something like that happen? How do you find those names? How do, you know, you get included if it's not in your regular world?
With Barry.
And so it's just like, sometimes I feel like things don't exist if I don't press or, you know, go and meet people and say, you know, I have this site. And they're like, oh my God, those podcasts do exist. And it's like, yeah, we're out here. And, you know, like sometimes people will say, why aren't we making iTunes? And I don't understand it all the way, because I would think Drinking Partners would have made that kind of beer list that was on iTunes, because there was at least 4 or 5 podcasts that had less, you know, review, like less than the half of the reviews they had and things like that, and episodes. And so it's just like, I don't know the system, but it's being around things that you know and you like and you take to. And if you don't have diverse people in the room that, you know, hear different voices, you all are all sharing the same thing. So
just thinking about their structure, I don't know it personally, but I know like when I got featured on iTunes the first time is I worked with one person, right? And if you think about one person is the person that curates the whole feed, then it really is just up to what that one person knows. You know what I mean? And it's like,
yeah, it was me meeting that one person that opened the door for a lot of people. And I didn't know that. And so literally it was me meeting that one person, and a lot of stuff happened after that, which I was very excited about. But I'm like, what if I didn't use all my, you know, my own money, and I didn't go to the place where I met that person, and then none of that happened? And then I feel like if I'm not putting myself out there enough, the people I like and the podcasts I like are not going to get the shine that they need. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So it's a circle, but I'm happy that iTunes is doing the things that they're doing. I'm happy that your show and like other shows like you are getting shine and like getting seen in a different way, because it needs to be seen.
And you know what? It's like that, I guess on the other side of the spectrum, it's like iTunes is the biggest podcast directory. So it's kind of like you need to be on iTunes in order to grow your podcast. Like, I don't know of any podcast that isn't on iTunes. Do you?
There's a podcast out of London called Don't Ask, Don't Tell that has a good amount of listeners. I had heard about it from Darian that does Am I Allowed to Like Anything? Mm-hmm. Everything. But she told me about that podcast, and that's something not listed on iTunes, and it's because they go off of RSS feed, something weird. But they're probably the only people I really know about that have a following that people talk about that aren't on iTunes.
Mm-hmm. What if, like, imagine a world where there was a huge directory such as iTunes for just podcasts of color, where if you were on that, you could like have monopoly over the industry. You think about it, like, how did iTunes get to be number one? Like, I just wonder how that works.
It's because of the iPhone. It's literally because of the iPhone and them having the app in the iPhone and using it from there. Like, it's that resource, which is why I thought when Google Podcast came out that was going to be just some wild thing, because when you think about everybody with Android phones and them having the same power that iTunes did, but it's about really having a vision. Like, you see iTunes has their list. People love to be like, I am on the iTunes 100. I'm in iTunes TV and film. I'm in this. It's like, I don't understand why anybody hasn't created a list like that. Like, lately, I've really been thinking about how can I do something like that? Like the top 20 list from the week or a top 10 list, because that really does mean something. Like, if you say at least 20 people, you know, recommended a podcast this week or something like that, it means something. And that's why people really love iTunes.
I'm thinking of something. Maybe BT needs to make a phone, right? And then I don't know where I'm going with this. Do we?
I feel like I wish like Blavity or something like that would do a top 20 or a top 10 list that's coming out weekly. Like, you know, but it's like, what would you be gauging it off of? But everybody picks something. Like, we don't know exactly what iTunes, you know, does. So to pick your own formula and say, these are what's hot this week. And so, I don't know, I'm sure it's coming, or maybe I'll stop being lazy and figure out something to justify and do something like
You
that.
never know. Maybe somebody will listen to this podcast and be inspired and be like, Barry, I want to help you build this. And in 6 months from now, we might have a whole new platform. You never know. You never know, Barry. But let's talk about podcasts, because I can't have you on the show and not give our listeners a little of the knowledge that you have learned over these past few years just working with and talking to creators. So let's say somebody wants to launch a podcast, right? What would be your number one tip for someone launching a new podcast?
I would say, I'm going to take this answer is old school, just like a blog, is to save the URL everywhere and start there. Because if you go and look and there's 5 podcasts with that name you thought was, creative, you can go back and say, you know what, let me start somewhere different. So I say that's a big thing, because there's a few podcasts that have similar names. They're like the same name that I'm like, oh, I don't know how that's going to work as you all grow. And then I would say to try a couple of episodes, like to not just do an episode, put that out and say, I have a podcast, but to record 2 or 3 episodes and see if it's something you're really going to consistently do. Like, was it hard for you to get those 3 out? After you re-listen to those 3, did you like those? And would you say your friend would listen to the same thing? Or, if you told one of your friends about it, did they turn it off after 10 minutes? So just kind of testing yourself out to see if it's something you're going to consistently do.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people say I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about how people just do podcasts to do podcasts. I think there are some people who don't realize what it takes to really be committed to building a podcast, and they get discouraged, and then they may build up hype that people want to support, but then they just kind of back out. You know what I mean? Like the podcast.
I'm just exactly how you do it. It's just there. People are like, oh, I'm here. But then when you think about the detail and the time and going back, it's not easy.
It definitely is not easy at all. And I even remember like the beginning of Dreams and Drive. Well, it wasn't even Dreams and Drive. In the beginning, it was the No Parking podcast. And thinking about it now, like, I don't know why I didn't go with Dreams and Drive before. But because my tagline was Dreams and Drive, but I was convinced that No Parking sounded cooler. And then I remember episode 6 with Sakita Holly of Hashtags and Stilettos. She was like, Raina, so what's the name of your podcast? And I was like, No Parking Podcast, Dreams and Drive. She was like, no, this is not gonna work, girl. I was like, no, but it will work. Just put a colon in between the two, And
I remember asking you about it, and you and Toby, and I was like, you know what? If that's what she wants to commit to, what am I going to say? That's her podcast.
You did. I remember that it was you and Sakita, because she mentioned it too. And then I think it wasn't until, because I was even doing like the podcast episode art still had No Parking for a long time. Even my show, like the intro still says No Parking. I've just been lazy to change it. But I realized that it wasn't about me. It was more about what was going to make sense to the listeners. Because to me, No Parking made sense, and I thought it was catchy, the alliteration, No Parking Podcast. But I think Dreams and Drive just probably resonated with what I wanted people to feel when they were listening to the show. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I like your opening with it because, even though people don't know that maybe, if they didn't start from the beginning, it was no parking, it still goes with what you're doing. Like, it's the no parking zone because you're saying not to stay still and, just more. So I still feel like it fits.
Thank you. So what's something that you feel like you've learned about yourself throughout this whole podcast and color journey, Barry?
That I can do something consistently. I feel like this is like the longest I've ever committed to anything and kept it going and not just walked away. It is not that I haven't tried to walk away a few times, but the times I have, people have said no. So I'm still here. And I feel like I just learned more about podcasts, like that my opinions, even though I feel like they're just off the top of my head and things I think everybody knows, that people are like, thank you for saying that. Thank you for doing this. And I'm like, I just figured everybody knew that, but I guess glad I said it. So
what are some of your top, I wish everybody knew, I thought everyone knew this moments?
I would say the SoundCloud URL thing.
Oh my God, you were just tweeting about that. I actually have it pulled up because I was gonna ask you about that. Okay, talk to us about that.
And that's when you have SoundCloud.com / the podcast name, instead of /user-12 or 34, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter of how you're coming up in search. So if somebody's searching for your podcast and they're putting in keywords in SoundCloud or even Google, that your podcast is coming up, and it's not going to necessarily maybe come up in the way you want it to if that URL isn't correct. And let's see, you said, what were a couple of things? So yes, the SoundCloud thing, I would say the hashtag thing, I love hashtags.
Yes, you do. And you would hashtag police too. Don't use pods in color or pod in wrong, or Barry will come after you. I remember one time you politely told me that. I'm like, oops, my bad. I ain't never doing this again.
I try to do it, but I'm like, if I can, it's a growing experience for me because I'm like, I want pods in color to be more for episode promotion, podcast news, when people are talking to each other about podcasts. Mm-hmm. But I really wanted, when I was thinking about the hashtags, was for pod in, or like I wanted a hashtag that people could do a now listening for podcasts, because I was really sick of trying to be in other people's mentions or search hashtags or whatever, try to figure out where people are listening. And so I'm like, if I can get people to do that under pod in, where you're like, people are listening under here, and then people are, doing the other thing over there, that's my dream. Because when I talk to other people, or like I'm talking to different networks and stuff that are white, they're like, well, who's listening? Well, what podcast are they listening to? And I want to be able to say, well, you can look at this hashtag and they're telling you what podcast they're listening to, like I just want to bring something more. So this is me trying to build a community in a different way and to show that we are out here. And I guess I am the hashtag police because I love hashtags, but I'm just like, I don't want them used together, because if I wanted them together, I would have just created one hashtag. Like, it doesn't make sense to me in that sort of way. And so I see a bigger vision. I see somebody being able, like today when somebody said, what's a hashtag to search podcast? That was like, I screamed this morning, like, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And when somebody says that, for somebody to direct you to Pods in Color, and then you go find it, like, it doesn't have to be me. You don't have to come to Pod and say, well, what podcast do you think? No, you can go search that hashtag, and there are tons of podcasts, and you can find one. And that's my hope. So.
And I respect you being a police on your hashtag, because I feel like it makes people respect it and people don't spam it, in the sense that, if you go to Pods in Color, you'll find what people are listening to or pod in. And I even think today you had to school somebody about it's not like, you need to respect what it is that I'm trying to build. And I just think that more creators should police their stuff. I mean, it is public domain, like everyone has access to it, but it just makes it more like a community, and the people in the community will even police it for you too. You know what I mean?
And that's it. When they did that, and I say that to everybody, like, I'm not doing this something in a rude way. I'm like, I'm trying to support you. And the way I can do this is, if you're hashtagging Pods in Color, I'm going to retweet it. And, many people say, I saw a retweet, or, I saw this. And it's like, if I'm retweeting this, that's how I can do it. It's not just some random hashtag you're using that nobody's retweeting or interacting with. And you're like, I think people see it. No, you're using my hashtag. Every couple of days, I'm retweeting the different hashtags depending on what I'm talking about that day, because I want people to find it. I want to talk about different podcasts. I want to have, I'm not listening to every podcast, but if I have that tag, there's so many times where I've been like, oh no, I saw a podcast about that. And then I can tell them it's not something I've listened to, but I'm like, I know it exists because of that tag.
So you talked about SoundCloud URLs. You talked about people using hashtags and creating them for their shows, and then even tagging into yours. What's something else that you think people really need to be paying attention to if they have a podcast?
I would say paying attention to what bigger podcasts do. So, like, if Another Round or Two Dope Queens or somebody is going to do a Facebook Live, looking at their Facebook Live and seeing what happens. Like, if Another Round is doing a Facebook Live and you're like, oh, there's maybe only 50 people in this video, and that's how big of a following do they have? And it's like, if I only have a following of 100, what can I expect? And if I'm getting 20 people to view my video, I must be doing something well if, they're that huge and maybe only getting 50. So to kind of look at what bigger podcasts are doing and figuring out how to scale it for yourself, and maybe building, since you're smaller, building with those things and not doing it as you get bigger, and then trying new things.
Are there any podcast metrics or benchmarks that you know about that people who are starting out can kind of gauge or compare themselves to? Or do you think that's a good practice or not?
Not really, because it doesn't feel like with different podcasts, like the numbers, everybody has, I would say, different numbers or different things they might go off of. And nobody has iTunes numbers. So, it's a big guess on a lot of things.
Why won't they release it?
So to me, I feel like if I'm starting a podcast, one thing I would look into is people reacting to the podcast. So whether people are saying, I don't like this podcast, or your audio could be better, or I didn't like the subject matter, one thing you have to say is that they listened, and then they listened long enough to kind of know what happened during your podcast. And it's like, okay, if I got them to listen and they knew what happened, what can I improve of? So, maybe next time their comments might be better. Like a good comment or bad comment, I'm like, if somebody is commenting, you have won. So that should be your first thing. Like if you've got somebody commenting in some kind of way, take that win and figure out how to turn that win into something more. And most times those people aren't doing that, or like somebody wasn't nice to them and they're sick about that. And it's like, don't be sick about that. Be excited that somebody's, talking about your stuff.
I know. And I think it also just goes to say that you really need to be engaging with people if you want to grow, because people like to know that someone's on the other side of like the social media platform. So I think when people tweet me, I always try to say, thank you, or ask them a question to just get in there. So if someone says, hey, I love this episode, I'll say, so how did you hear about us? Or I'll say, what was your favorite part? Because then that's intel that you can then use to help improve your podcast. So as you said, I definitely agree with that. So I actually have a listener
question.
So much
agreement. Okay, sorry. One more thing is how you just said that. That's why, I remember finding the Receipts podcast out of London, but I remember using the hashtag that I just figured they were using. And then the host found me. And then, that's how we started interacting. And I was like, oh, okay, if they talk back and stuff, I can really be a part. And they got me. And now I'm there now it's every week. But it's like they're talking back to you. They're interacting. It's something when people do that, when they feel like maybe they even only have 10 listeners. And I'm like, I like that kind of stuff. So
you know who, when she responded to me, Myleik, I love when Myleik responds to people. That's one of my favorite podcasts. That was one of my first podcasts that I really got into from creators of color. Because honestly, I was trying to go back in my head and think about the first podcast I ever listened to. And I'll have to say, it was not a creator of color. It was this guy, Nate, I forgot his last name, of Loveumentary. Have you ever heard of that?
Never heard of it.
Basically, it's a podcast where he toured the U.S. and interviewed couples about their love life, and they gave their advice on how to have happy and healthy relationships. And I used to be tuned in religiously, but he kind of did it in tandem with his blog. So in my head, I didn't really know what a podcast was. I just saw it as, oh, this is a blog that has audio. You know what I mean? And then I ventured on to Lewis Howes, School of Greatness. I love that one. And then it was Myleik, because I started following Myleik on social, and then I just got obsessed with her podcast. I love it.
I was telling somebody the other day, I'm very surprised she's not at the top of iTunes, or, hasn't been, I guess, used more, because when you think about the things that she has, some people only have a podcast, and she has a podcast plus a whole nother network of things. I remember when I first started listening to her, and I was listening to old episodes, and it was like, oh, the notebooks are already sold out. Sorry. And then I was listening to a few more episodes. She was like, yeah, I did that. Thank you guys for selling it out really quickly. And I was like, what am I listening to? Because it seems like anything she does, the people are like, thank you. I'm going to take that. I'll take that now. And so I was just like, okay, so she has power, before even knowing other people really listen. And then once I was really getting into it, I was like, she is really giving us stuff that I never thought I'd be getting from people, the conversation she has. I'm just like, thank you. I don't even know that I could be sharing and doing as much as you do at the level you're doing it. And that's just, I love her. I'm really thinking about going to the live show, and I wasn't going to think about it. So
you should. You definitely should. And what I like about hers podcast, and I think it can be a testament to you don't have to be pretty to have an engaged audience. Her podcast in the beginning, I think she didn't even have a mic. She didn't even have a mic. She was just recording it on her computer, and no one cared. You know what I mean? I wasn't listening into it and oh my God, I hear the echoes. I was just absorbing it because I thought the information was that good. So for anyone listening, if you don't have all the equipment, don't let that stop you from starting, because there are people who don't care if your sound is top notch, if you're giving them good quality.
It really matters. It's content. And I mean, audio can change over time.
Mm-hmm.
I love that about Miley, as you were saying, because she talks about that. And then I listened to the episode where she was like, I got a mic because one of my friends hit me up and said, Miley, girl, come on. And I was like, but it's friends like that. But I was like, it shows that she was just doing it because she thought it could be something. And then her friends were like, no, this is something I'm really listening to, and I need you to put a little bit more into it. And she did. I'm like, audio does matter. And a lot of podcasts, have improved audio over time. But there are so many podcasts that people have listened to, like, I can't believe I listened to an hour and a half. And it was like, but you listened to that hour and a half. There's so many times I've listened to Bodega Boys, like, is he really chewing in my ear like this? And I'm still listening, but I'm still there the next week too. So I think once you have something and you found your thing, it really doesn't matter. And maybe some people are going to talk about the audio, but you can say that about any podcast. I mean, people talk about the Reed's audio. I remember there was one episode where Kid Fury was like, people say I'm mumbling, but I mean, I've never had that problem or felt like I couldn't hear him, but he was like, I don't know what you guys want. So I'm like, that means everybody gets, audio things or things people wish they could improve.
Yeah. And that's the part of the journey. Like, if you started out the best, then it wouldn't be fun. Like, people wouldn't want to, I like to grow with podcasts that I listen to. You know what I mean? Like, I like actually feel connected when the host is also growing. So that's me personally. Maybe not everyone's like that, but there is journey in growing and being transparent. Like, you don't have it all figured out, especially in the beginning. But I want to get to one of our listener questions, and this one is coming from Derek Murphy. And his question is, will you be hosting your own podcast, Barry?
I'm going to say yes at this time. That's something for me. Still thinking about it and what it's all going to be about and who I'm going to do it with and things like that. But I would say that will be coming because I do see, as I was saying before, that as the resource I am, I want to grow and tell even more people. And I feel like maybe a podcast can do that, where I'm talking about other podcasts and including their audio and really just kind of doing what I do on my Twitter account to attract people. Is that's what we do. We talk about podcasts. I'm going to give you my review and then maybe have somebody else on there talking about it. So at some point there will be a podcast about podcasts where we're laughing and joking and saying what we like and what we don't like.
Oh, that would be really cool. The whole concept of a podcast about podcast. Okay, so his other question was, what's next on the entrepreneurship route? And maybe let me add my own twist to this. So how do you plan on monetizing? I mean, I don't know if you are already, but how do you want to monetize the Podcast in Color platform? I
guess I do in ways, like I've been thinking about maybe reaching out to Squarespace, like to sponsor the site. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to do too much. I don't want anybody coming on the website and the website is frozen because an ad has to pop up and all this stuff. Like, that is never my goal. I really want Podcast in Color to grow more organically and just be a resource more than anything else. Like, I don't want it to be burdened down by other people trying to get their message out. I want people to be able to find podcasts.
But then you, like, Barry the brand, you could definitely monetize that. Like, I know you were talking about being a podcast consultant. Like, that, girl, let me tell you, that could be, you could be like crazy lucrative and so niche. Because you're so niche, people and charge people top prices, like $1,000 a minute for my advice. Well, not really, but you know what I mean.
I deal with this, as I was saying earlier, like, does this really matter? Do people really need this? And that's really what's held me back from saying it, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to start this. And I said in November, I'm going to start it. And then I keep saying, okay, I'm going to podcast consult and I'm going to tell people I'm really consulting. But I just end up stopping because I'm like, do they really need that? Is anybody really going to hit me up to do this? Do I really have to do it? So I've been thinking about it. So I do work at Loudspeakers Network, and that's from Podcast in Color. I got that opportunity. And right now I'm doing social media, but I'm actually, and everything is just from talking, maybe working with them on a podcast that's being created. So, there's other things coming. As I was saying online the other day, that the first time I met up with Chris Morrow and I was telling him about the ideas I had, he was telling me I wanted to be a podcast producer. And I'm like, no, I want to do social media. And he was like, okay. And so, but we're seeing where that goes and what can go from there.
I feel like you already are kind of like a podcast producer through social media, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do get it.
Because people value your opinion, people value your insight, people value your commentary. Like, I know, like, if I want to know something that's going on in the podcast world, I just scroll through your timeline like, oh my God, who pissed Barry off? Or, oh my God, who's doing something that is, worthwhile for me to know about. So there definitely could be something there. But thinking about, this being as part of your dream driving story, what do you think is something that's holding you back beyond just the idea of not knowing if people will care or people actually will find it worthwhile? What's something else that you think might be holding you back?
It almost feels like I don't know enough, but I've been taking classes, so I don't feel that way lately. But it's more me holding me back than anything else. Because when I talk to other people, or like when I'm in New York talking about different things, I can see people take to it, and people are like, oh my God, you should be doing more, or there should be more there. And I'm like, okay, so it's me. It's not, it's not other people. It's me holding me back more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's another listener question that could be a good segue. This is from Wise, and he wants to know: do you like the nickname "the godmother of podcasts"?
No, I don't even react to that. I've seen him say that before. I love him, so I just don't respond. I don't like being called a mom in any way. I know that sounds weird. But I mean, I'm an aunt, so I really will call myself auntie through Twitter or things like that because I don't care, because I am an aunt. Mm-hmm. But I don't take to the mother name at all. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just don't.
You could be the cool auntie of podcasts or something like that.
Yeah, I'll take that. I would take something like that.
But think about where you were a year before you started Podcasts in Color, right? Mm-hmm. And think about where you want to be a year from now. What do you think will be the biggest change for you within that time period? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I would say the biggest change will probably be a different state. During that time, I don't think I had my own place, so I'm thinking I might have my own place. But in the thing that I'm thinking about right now, I don't know. It'd be a total different type of thing. Like, most likely, I'm thinking about moving to New York and just getting a room but I only plan on doing it for like a year. Like, I've been telling myself I could move to New York. I only have to stay for a year. Like, I don't have to stay and become a New Yorker. That's my
Do you see my face? I wish you could. I would turn on the Skype so you could see my face right now. Like, okay. New York sucks people in, and you never leave, and you come back with a New York accent. So are you ready?
I just feel like I won't. When I'm there and I come back to Denver, it feels so like, you're coming back to a small town, even though Denver is a big city. Like, you got a break, and there's not people everywhere. And so that's one thing that always brings me back to Denver, or to, I would say, somewhere else. So I plan on maybe living a couple of different places. I only just got my passport last year. I really want to be open to more opportunities and go with the opportunities. So I've been saying I'm going to move to New York. And right now there was a job that was reached out to me. So I was like, if that didn't come through, New York is next. And then I don't know what's next after that, but it could be anywhere.
Well, that's good. And plus, I feel like with the new economy, having jobs where you could do it virtually would be interesting. If you could be somewhere where you could travel wherever you want and still be able to do what you want to do, that would be ideal. But what's one thing you know for sure when it comes to building community and what you've built with Podcasts in Color?
And one thing I know for sure is that when you're passionate about it, people will come. And so when you're doing something that you do that you know is needed, but you're not really passionate about it, people might come, but they're not necessarily staying because they know you're just showing up because. Like, when I'm showing up and I'm talking about podcasts, I feel passionate as if this is my full-time job and they were really paying me a lot of money. But I'm like that. Like, I was looking at the Black Enterprise podcast thing, and I'm like, I can't believe they haven't changed their SoundCloud URL from the user thing. Like, who was on your team? I'm looking at the Bronzeville thing where I'm like, your episode notes, I'm not sure why you would put all of that at the end of audio and place none of that in your episode notes. Like, who was on your team? Like, I feel what I know for sure is that I know me, and I know that I'm a detail-oriented person, and I'm needed. So I'm out here.
And that's why we need you to start your podcast consultancy, and then you can hire some freelancers, some, subcontractors to help you out, girl. I'm good at writing show notes, so if you need some help with that.
Oh, I love your show notes. I love the details. I love the color of your graphics. I just feel like that's what's always attracting me to your podcast.
Thank you. And you know what? That goes back to the whole idea of, I don't want to say I'm a podcasting guru, because I'm definitely not. But I think one thing that helps me is always trying to constantly learn. And I think the resources that you share, the resources that a lot of other creators of color share, are there for us all to capitalize on. So if you're a podcaster who may not, this is really just a passion for you right now, you're not into the details, you're not into the other tech side of it, definitely learn and spend some time trying to figure out how you can optimize your platform, because there are small tweaks that you can do to really boost engagement. And I think some people are just like, well, I'm just a creative, I'm not into that other stuff, or people will listen no matter how I present it. But no, people will listen, but will they come back? Will they know how to come back? And I know you talk about this a lot, is telling people how to listen to your podcast, right? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I feel like the thing they're doing this month, NPR, with the tripod, TRYPOD, their hashtag is what I do all the time. Mm-hmm. It's just you should be telling people, you should always be leading people back to your links, or asking how they listened. I was telling people, I have reached out to someone who worked at Spotify because I was talking to my cousin, and she figured out she could listen to podcasts on her Roku TV through the Spotify app. And I'm like, exactly. It's just having random conversations, or talking about how do other people connect. And you're like, oh, there might be somebody looking to listen that way, or, to hear a different way. So I really like that. And engagement, as we were talking about, as we were talking about, if you're talking about how to listen, you're telling people how to tell other people how to listen. So if I'm listening on Apple's app because I have an iPhone, but most of the people around me have Android phones, and you told me, but you can go to my website or SoundCloud.com/The Read, or other options. It means when I'm talking to my cousin, I can tell her SoundCloud.com/The Read. That's how you can listen to the thing I'm laughing at right now. So it's saying it, and then saying it in a way that somebody can repeat it easily. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing I don't think many people understand. It's it should be something somebody can regurgitate and say, oh yeah, I heard that. This is how you do it. That's how you want it, how easy you want it to be.
And one other thing when it comes to the different platforms that you can listen to, this is going to be a little technical, but know the nuances of your channel. So let's say in SoundCloud, when you're making your show notes, make sure you put a www. before your links, or they won't be clickable, right? And a lot of people don't do that, and it annoys me. I just want to click it. Just put a www. or do the http:// whatever. That's something that people can do. Okay, this is
funny. Sorry to cut you off, but the first time I was on the phone with someone at iTunes, I remember asking them, were they going to give the option so that when you were going through the podcast app and you saw the first page where you can kind of open the notes up some more, mm-hmm. when you see the link, I was like, why can't I click the link in that page? Why do I have to open up the podcast and then play it and then see it from another page, and then it gives me a clickable link? Little things like that, but that clickable link is real things. It can just lead to so much more, in my opinion.
Definitely. I am with you on that one. All right. So last question, Barry. Are you ready?
Yes.
And I said that because I didn't know what the last question was going to be yet. All right. I got it. So what's been a moment of darkness for you? A moment where you were really, in neutral and reverse, or in park when it came to building your platform? How did you get through it? And maybe talk to us about motivation that we can use in our own lives at those points when we feel like giving up.
I can say, okay, so I want to say it was last year. Another round had said something from their Twitter account about creating a podcast directory for podcasters of color. And I remember seeing that and feeling like a gutter punch. Are y'all serious right now? This is what I do. And I just was like, okay, I guess I'm not needed anymore. If this is going to be under BuzzFeed, there's no way anything I'm doing is competing with what BuzzFeed can do. Mm-hmm. And then people reach out to me so quickly. There's a couple of people I talked to that work at Acast, an app And that another round was under, and they reached out to me and they were like, no, it's going to be okay. And, like, don't be discouraged. And I ended up talking with the people from another round and other things like that. But nothing happened with that. And they actually just ended up doing a spotlight for Black podcasts and something else. But it just really felt like in that moment, I was like a really small person, and I wasn't going to be able to do anything with what I created, and somebody else was going to be able to do something with it. So I can say that was one moment. And then I wrote a letter about how I was going to, how I was going to quit. And then I came back type of thing. And then other people really support it. And that kind of showed me, and I think that people are really paying attention to what I'm doing. It's not just following to follow. So.
Yeah, and people, you have a little beehive yourself, definitely people, I wonder what we could call it. We could call it the berry hive. So who eats berries? I'm trying to think of an animal that eats berries.
I didn't think of one. I don't know.
But anyway, you got your own berry hive, all right? And
I can say that is kind of true. I'm starting to believe it. When I was just in New York and I met somebody from a podcast. I can't remember the podcast right now. But I was at the Reed show, and they saw me, and they knew my face. And they literally looked at me and they said Barry, but they didn't say it out loud. They listed like I was famous or something. And I was like, yeah, that's me. Like, I know what you're saying. She was like, oh my God. And then like, we have to move around. So we didn't really get to talk after that. But it was at that moment I was like, okay. Yes.
Does that ever scare you though? That, let's say that in the next 6 months and next year, Podcast in Color takes off in ways that you never could imagine. Like, is the whole idea of being podcast famous or podcast curation famous scary?
It is to me, only because there's reasons I would say I just hesitate to be in the spotlight. I don't love being stared at and that sort of thing. I don't want anybody, going down and taking a list of things. So, I mean, it takes a lot to be in a spotlight and for people to be able to talk about you and the comments they're going to have about you. And I'm like, I would rather you not, but I understand that that's the place that I'm in right now without even really thinking I would be there. Like, I thought I would do the site and nobody would pay attention to me. But like you said, people do pay attention to me and the person behind everything. Mm-hmm. So it's been scary, but I'm flowing with it. As long as more opportunities are coming with it and it's a happy thing, I'm okay with it, because everything that is brought to me and the people that I'm communicating with, like, it's things I never thought about.
All right, so let's go into our lightning round, Barry. So this part of the interview, I'm going to give you a prompt, and I want you to tell me the first word that comes to mind. And this is going to be sticking with our whole dreams and drive metaphor, okay?
Okay.
All right, the first word is park.
I went blank. Let's see here. Park. I would say that really mostly reminded me of the park, park, because I'm always walking. So I don't live far from a park. I'm a walker. And that's when I'm usually listening to podcasts with some earphones on, and I'm walking somewhere listening to it. So I would say a park, something that's relaxing.
All right, reverse.
Reverse feels like when I'm doubting myself. When I heard that, it was somewhere like doubt, like I'm doubting myself, so then I'm not doing anything. So it's almost like I'm going in reverse because I'm not going anywhere.
Neutral.
For me, neutral, I thought growing, because to me, if you're staying in the same place and you're kind of focusing on what's going on, you have a chance to do more if you know where you're going.
And then last but not least, drive.
Drive. I would say drive is what I thought about. It's just having the drive to keep going, because it's not always easy. When you wake up some days, you're not going to want to do it. I feel like I hear Kid Fury say that a lot, and I really like that. It's just like some days you're not going to do it. Some days you're going to want to stay napping, and you're going to have to get up and do it anyway. And that's real.
And if you want to be a dream driver, you have to have your keys to success. So, Barry, tell me 3 things that you think every dream driver needs in their toolkit before they hit the road.
3 things I would say is wanting to learn more, because if you don't want to learn more, it's just not going to help you. The second is learning how to take criticism that doesn't help and criticism that does help, just learning how to take them both in and not let it affect what you're doing right away. Kind of just seeing if it's supposed to or not. A lot of people cannot do that. And that's something I've learned is a huge thing. And third, I would say to have fun, like the ability to say no. I say no to a lot of things. I'm going to start saying yes to more things, but I'll say no to things. If I want to go for a walk that's for 2 hours instead of doing some work, I'm not doing it. And I don't really care if other people getting shine or something. Like, I really believe in me and having time off and being able to say, I had fun today, or I like myself today, and I always choose for that. So,
thank you for sharing that.
There's an article that's going to come out in a day or two. I'm nervous about because I really don't filter myself, I feel like, probably as much as I should. And I was talking to the person, and I said, we were talking earlier just on the podcast about how, like, you know, popular podcasts and what gets on iTunes. And I told him it's because regular white people are allowed a chance to make podcasts and get popular. But regular Black people, it's like, why? You know what I'm saying? It's like, no, I'll take somebody in entertainment. Like, you have somebody with, like, Kid Fury that had like 100,000 followers before the podcast and the YouTube following. Like, it's people in entertainment that are able to, you know, flip it over quick. But then you have regular white people that, you know, are doing regular things and they do cereal or something else. And it's like, oh my God, we gotta, you know, put something behind that. And then I would say something today on my Twitter timeline. And I'm like, whoever got that, it's kind of funny. But they're doing a podcast that's the making of the first season of Serial. And I'm like, there's so many Black podcasts that aren't being made or creative ideas. And you all are saying, let's just talk to the people that made that one good season of that podcast. And everybody that talks about it says, I listened to the first season and not the second. It's just, I don't know, it's wild.
Wow. It is.
But I was going to say the article is just going to come out and it's going to talk about how I said that most Black people have to be entertainers to make it in podcasting, and white people can just be kind of regular and be in podcasting and make it on iTunes and all these other places with no problem.
But it's true. If you think about it, like Black people got to be basketball players to get out the hood. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a matter of fact. And I feel like it's what deters people from trying. And I wish people didn't feel like that.
Yes, it is. So, I mean, I'm hopeful. I feel like in the last 2 years, like just from starting Podcast in Color and what I was really thinking about it, I'm like, I thought I wouldn't be listening that many podcasts. So I thought it would be small. I didn't think it would be, you know, as big as it is, and that I'd still be getting submissions on the regular and that sort of thing. So I'm like, it's a world growing that I don't think other people knew, and iTunes is seeing that now, and other people are seeing that. But I'm like, it's only a small window of times that we're really going to be iTunes, because when you have my leak selling out books, and then you have people hitting up Fran because, you know, so many people are buying what she's talking about, but they're like, I want to sponsor you to do different things. It's like, I might not show up on iTunes, but what I can do is get this money. So,
yeah. And that's what we need too, is bringing money into our communities and empowering people to know that they can create their own economies and their own destinies too, from what they're good at and what they love.
Exactly. So that's what I'm going to really start trying to push, is like, if you even don't make it on iTunes, it doesn't mean that you're not making it on money. Like, you're not making money. Like, I don't think the Friend Zone has ever been in the top 50, but I mean, Asante is now not work. You know, like, they're making their own choices now. So it's like, your podcast does not have to be on the top 50 of iTunes for you to actually be making it and maybe even living off of it. So
we got to have that Podcast in Color conference.
Oh God, did you see that conference happening in London later this year? I'm thinking of going. But you know what? I'm gonna talk to somebody I'm hoping that I'll meet up with a friend when I'm in DC next week, because I just don't know the background of having a conference and doing that kind of thing, but I am really thinking about it. So I'm thinking about events.
And we'll support you. You know, your Berry Hive will support you. So
I'm starting to be okay with growing and doing more and putting Podcast Out in Color out there more. So
you got it. And I feel like people are inspired what you do. Like, you never know who's being inspired by your actions. So know that there are people on the other side just looking up to you and really admiring you.
That freaks me out.
You know, I want to save some time for you to give a shout out to some of the podcasts that you're listening to this week. Things that are new, things you really like this week. Maybe just do a little shout out of the podcast that you really like.
Okay. Well, I think I said it wrong earlier, but Darian's podcast, Am I Allowed to Like Anything? Mm-hmm. I really love that because she interviews just different people that I wouldn't think about. I feel like some people might do like yours as more entrepreneurs, but it feels like hers is almost like her dope friends. I'm like, can my friends do that? Dope friends.
Am I allowed to have dope friends?
Exactly. That's what I wish my podcast was like. Can I do that too? Making Oprah, but I feel like I re-listen to that sometimes. Love that, like the powerfulness of Oprah and her knowing her power. Like, I really wish they would give us a second season of something else. Corinne Bailey Ray's. I listened to. She had one that went with her album, which is, I'm trying to think of the name of it. Was the Heart Speaks in Whispers. But if you look up Corinne Bailey Ray podcast, it comes up, and they're short episodes, like 15 to 20 minutes. And it's like some are on sleeping and like just having self-care and it's different things. And I'm like, woman to woman, thank you for that. Like your album, like that was pretty cool. Let's see here. I would have probably said yours, Dreams and Drive. The Receipts, I listened to that now that it's weekly.
Casey Crew. Did you listen to the episode today?
I love, of course. When the Casey Crew comes up on my, like, if somebody said, what's the podcast that comes up on your thing and you just press play, that's the Casey Crew for me because I know they're not going to talk about politics. There's something that I don't want to hear about. Like, they're talking about themselves. And I think I like that they have that obsession with themselves. Like, they don't need to get on there and say, let's talk about everybody else. Like, it's like, no, we've had enough stuff go on that we could do this for probably a couple of years and have subject matter. And yes, I listened to the one today about their kids. Oh, my God. I love them. I love Gia.
And being abducted. You know what's funny, though? I find myself like psychoanalyzing both of them and how they ended up with each other and stayed with each other for so long. Like I feel like they both bring something to the other one that they both needed. You know what I mean?
That is like a true statement. Like I'm sure you listened to the one where they talked about the cheating episode, and I haven't been able to watch the video of it on Revolt, and I'm against Revolt for that, but I love them for that. Like it's just I don't get how they stay together either. I tell people all the time. I started listening because I wanted to know how Gia stayed. And I thought Gia was more like of a yes girl, like MZ would say 7. She was like, yes, okay. And to hear that she has pushback and that's how it works, I think I like that even more because it's like, no, Gia has a voice. And like things
and
are quiet over
that.
there.
He low key likes that. He low key like I feel like she allows him to feel like he's like the king of the house, but really Gia is running the show. You know what I mean? Gia is running the show. So.
Yes. Oh my God! When the story she tells when she said when my son is being bad and he can hear my steps coming down the hallway, he just starts apologizing to everybody in the room or whatever. Now that. I was like, you ain't playing with them. Like, I love this.
Like, if they had a reality show or maybe just even like a documentary, I would watch that just to see how it actually looks and plays out in real life.
I really wish that they would do a giveaway with the robes because I really wish I could wear one of their robes while listening to the podcast. So that's really what I want.
Yes. Are there any more that you want to shout out?
Oh, there was a podcast I listened to this week for the first time called Fly with Bats. Bats like the animal, BATS. And it's out of New Orleans. And I really liked it. It was 3 guys. And they were talking about actually trans issues and like things like that. And it wasn't, when I saw the 3 guys discuss it, I was just like, oh my God, it's just going to be a whole bunch of no homos and crazy stuff. And I'm like, why would you say this? But it wasn't. And I was like, okay. I feel you. Like, there's people out here not trying to be ignorant for a listen, and I really like that. So,
all right. So, can you tell our dream drivers where they can find you online and engage with the Podcast in Color community?
You can find me. It's podcast with an S in color everywhere. So, podcastincolor.com, Podcast in Color on Twitter, on Instagram, and Facebook, and any other social networks. You would be able to search #Pods in Color. And you'll be able to find other podcasters of color.
All right. Thank you so much, Barry, for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you. And I hope that our dream drivers listening in enjoyed our conversation as much as I did.
I hope so, too.
All right, so that's it for episode 75 with Barry of Podcast in Color. I hope that you guys enjoyed hearing her dream driving story as well as her keys to success. And Barry, I just am so thankful that she said yes to being on the show because I think that it's important to honor the voices that have really helped amplify our voices. And I say that because I think as a podcaster of color, sometimes it may feel like our voices aren't being heard, and other creators of color color who are listening, this is something that's so important. We need to honor and we need to really appreciate those that are our advocates. And I think that anyone who is a podcaster of color, who has used Pods in Color, who knows what Barry has been doing, knows that she is an advocate for Black podcasters. She's an advocate for podcasters of color. And she's someone who will spend her own money, her own dime to really advance this cause. So thank you, Barry. You are appreciated. And something I want to encourage everyone out there to do is to support. I think that a lot of us creatives, a lot of us entrepreneurs sometimes feel like we don't have support. So if you know someone's doing something amazing, go ahead and share what they're doing. Go ahead and, like their stuff. Go ahead and tell someone else about it, because there's no way that we can grow as a community if we aren't being active and really putting the community into community. So I just hope that this podcast inspired you to really just keep doing what you're doing. And if you're passionate about something, and if you really, really feel like you can't not think about it, make it happen. Do something about it. Put your work out there in the world, because you'll never know what will happen if you never do it, right? If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to check out our show notes. Just go to dreamsanddrive.com and click on episode 75. And I also encourage you to check out the free resources that we're going to be spotlighting this month as part of our Driver's Ed series. So you can get our episode worksheet on how to get publicity for your brand. You can also get our episode worksheet on how to overcome fear of failure and motivate yourself. That's all available at dreamsanddrive.com/free. And the most recent one that's up there is our networking contact template worksheet. And you will want that if you listen to episode 74 with Gabrielle Simpson, when we talk about how to build relationships and how to find mentors. Go to dreamsanddrive.com/free to get all of those episode resources and worksheets. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode. Our Driver's Ed series has really been very successful so far. If you ever have any suggestions or things that you want to hear about in the podcast, I encourage you to go fill out our Dreams and Drive survey. That's dreamsanddrive.com/survey. And I'm really hoping to hear from you all and just to get feedback on how we can improve the show and make the Dreams and Drive community much better. As always, keep dreaming, keep driving, and we'll chat again in episode 76. Can you guys believe it? It's episode 76. And for anyone who's been listening since episode 1, I didn't even think I would make it to episode 76. So thank you for rocking with me, and we'll chat soon.